I would like all of you, whatever your background in Dynamics to date, and as we've heard, we've got a couple of very experienced people on the call and a couple of less experienced people on the call. But I would like you to imagine a situation where your project or your next project has all the users excited to use the solution that you've provided, clamoring for more material or more extensions. And that is an opportunity for you if you get the training of the project right. What I would also like to highlight here is when I talk about Dynamics 365 training, I am not just talking about end user training. There is a lot more besides the end user training that we need to think about. Now, what I would like you to do, first of all, is vote in a poll. So I would like you to go to that URL, which is a different tiny URL, and vote on the question, which is, what do you believe is the failure rate of ERP and CRM projects? So has everybody voted? So they're the results that we're getting. In other words, and you're actually close to being right. But before I go on and discuss that any further, I'd like to ask another question. Would you go to a doctor or a surgeon where it was commonly known that their failure rate was somewhere between 65 and 85%, which is the results of the poll that you have put according to the people here? I would like you to think about that for a moment. That is the failure rate that we as an industry are achieving for our clients. And if that doesn't get you frightened, nothing will. So I'm now going on and showing you just what the actual failure rate is. And it is according to an average of a number of different reports, somewhere close to 85%. And there are lots and lots of places that you can read about where those numbers have come from and why they happen. That's not what I want to do here, even though it is a monstrously depressing statistic. It is worth noting that most of those projects were not complete failures. They probably did produce some benefits, but just nothing like the benefits that were used to justify the project in the first place. And I think that is probably the key issue. And those of you that overheard Joe and I talking before we started, some of the problems that exist out in user land are the cause of some of that. So this idea that go agile, do a bit and then we'll change it and then this and then that, that is certainly part of the cause of the overall failure rate. Another statistic that is sort of related to that comes out of a report that was done called the 2019 Digital Transformation. And what is in that report, or two key things that are in it. First of all, over 50% of organizations going live with CRM or ERP experience in an operational disruption to the level that they're unable to ship products, do financial transactions, or perform some other essential function within a timely fashion. And additional to that, the overrun cost of projects, again on average, is somewhere between 50% and 300%. So if you budgeted 100,000 for your project, you are looking at paying somewhere between 150,000 and $400,000 for that project. And that, of course, is a big reason for failure. It may be that what's being delivered is actually good, reasonably good, but because of the budget overrun and the flow-on effects of that throughout the organization, you see it as a failure. What I'm now going to look at is just quickly some of the reasons for project failure. And you've quite possibly heard all of these in the chit chat that Joe, Lindy, Alina and I were engaging in earlier. So the first one is poor project objectives. Then we've got poor strategy. So both of those are overall planning and management issues. The third one is scope creep, and that's probably the biggest area of the budget overrun. So someone had an idea that we deliver this and it would cost that, but because that wasn't justified and understood, they then found, well, can you add, can you just? And if the people doing it are on a T&M, they will happily add and add and add, and then suddenly the bill comes in. Another big area is poor business process design. So creating processes or implementing processes that force the users to jump through hoops or work harder than in the old way of doing things, whatever that might have been. Another very important point is a failure in user adoption, and that is where you've rolled out this CRM, quite possibly with a lot of fanfare and celebration and so on. And the users just say, no, my old way is better, easier, simpler, I prefer it. And given that one of the reasons that is often stated for going with a CRM, regardless of technology solution, it is very, very likely that you will not get the reports that were given as part of the justification if you've got some users using the new CRM a bit, perhaps, maybe, and other users just doing any old way to avoid using CRM. We also see a lot of poor leadership within the project and within the project teams. So this can apply not only to the business that's doing the implementing, but it can apply to a partner or a third party who is coming in to execute on the project. And I can say hand on heart that that is one of the things that we've seen in the client that I took to the fork in the road today. Well, poor project execution. I think we can go somewhere. There was definitely poor project execution if we have got a failure. So, moving off that rather sad area, What can we do to succeed? A CRM project can undoubtedly cost thousands, but done properly, it can also save you thousands of dollars. And some of that saving is almost certainly one of the reasons why an organization goes down the CRM path to begin with. Without a shadow of a doubt, training is the cornerstone of a successful project. And so if you can get the training right, that could save you or your client thousands of dollars. So how do we make sure that we get it right? Well, one of the tips is to evangelize the technology as a tool to increase personal success. It is essential when you're evangelizing that you focus on the gains for the individual users. Don't focus on the organizational gains or the management gains or the reporting gains, because that will just feed the fire of the reason this was done was so that Big Brother can watch over me. Make sure that you do integrate all the different or all the relevant parts of the business and talk about getting a team to look after all of the clients rather than this person doing their bit of the job and then another person and another person. So really try and broaden the overall use of information so that the whole solution belongs to the organization, is used by the organization to look after the organization's clients. So you do have to focus on the what's in it for me for each individual user, but try and also get across the team and we're all in this together. And then obviously, given the title of this presentation, make sure that you do provide training, which will be a key part of success. I, of course, talk about training, but I absolutely hate what I call tick box training. And tick box training is training where the objective is just to tick the box that training has been done without any real care about the results or the outcome of that training. So I like to do that. So do not do tick box training. So now I will move into the overall meat of this presentation, where I will talk about what I think are the 7 sins of Dynamics 365 training. And in fairness, the vast majority of what I'm talking about could apply to other CRM technologies, ERP technologies, even non-ERP CRM type technologies. There is very little that I'm talking about here that is Dynamics specific, but it certainly does apply to Dynamics. So the first of the sins that we're going to talk about is pride. And where we see pride as the undoing is where we've got people saying we don't need external resources. We've got developers, we've got power users, I'm sure they can deliver training. So the overall sin there is failing to use trainers and being bitten, therefore, by pride that is, in this case, misplaced pride in certain members of the team. The next of the sins is lust. And lust comes about where you've got a trainer or a person who's been given the trainer hat to wear for a while, who doesn't include practical. Using any technology is by definition a practical exercise. So your training absolutely must include real practical. It also involves problem solving. So if you just do follow along training and just copy what I do, by the time people leave that training, their absorption and retention of what they've done will be very low, and they will struggle to apply that to their world when they go back to their desk and try to use it. Having said all of that, practical exercises are challenging to develop. So poor trainers will think of themselves more than the actual participants and not bother with developing them, so they're not there. Poor trainers are often in lust with the software. They don't see the reality, and they think that the people can just watch along, and then the software is so good, or their implementation is so good, that everything else will just follow along nicely. So failing to include practical happens when you've got people who are in lust with the project and the implementation that they've done. So that is sin number 2. Sin number 3 is envy. And envy occurs when we've got people who aren't interested in developing real knowledge. They're all about me, and I'm better than you because I've got 5 exam passes and you haven't got any. So very self-centered and just wanting to get people through the exams rather than focusing on real understanding and being able to apply that information to the real world. So envy comes about when we're focusing on exam passes. The next sin we've got is anger or wrath. And that is where people get cranky because their people, their team members, whoever they may be, do not develop a good, strong understanding. And that can come about where the trainers or non-trainers don't know what training is, or maybe there's senior management that say we don't need to do testing and training, we'll just throw people in a room, let them figure it out, and it'll all be okay on the day. These people also get cranky when you try having a conversation with them about the different types of training. So I've said a couple of times at the beginning of this call that there's a lot more to training than end user training. I actually argue that there are 4 types of training that should be included in almost any project of this type. And what those 4 types of training are, if we go through them in order that you would typically deliver them in a project, the first is what I call either business expert, business user, or subject matter expert training. And that is training for certain key users on the out of the box functionality of the selected technology. Make sure that you've got a number of people, and when I say a number, it doesn't need to be a huge number, and it certainly wouldn't be the whole user base, but aim for 2 or 3 people who've got a reasonable knowledge of the out-of-the-box technology and a knowledge of the business. And those people then can do what I call the move to the middle approach. So you've got business processes, business needs, they are what they are. You've got a technology such as Dynamics 365 that does what it does. If you try to move the business processes and business needs all the way over to the technology, you will probably have problems. Equally, if you try to move the technology all the way over to the business needs, you will also end up with a lot of problems, and that can be the sort of situation where we end up with stupid numbers of fields added to entities. What I think works best is move both of them, so the business requirements and the technology, into the middle to each other, hence the move to the middle approach. This guy is a glutton. And why is he a glutton? He is a glutton because he is trying to squeeze training in at any time that suits him, rather than what works with the project. So he might be squeezing it in, we just happen to have an empty gap 3 months before go live. Or maybe we haven't got any time at all before go live, so we'll do it a couple of weeks after go live. And it just doesn't work. You really need to be doing your end user training at really no more than 2 weeks before go live. And you also need to be aware of people who join your organization after go live. They also need to get whatever training on the system is necessary. So he's a glutton because he's focused on himself and what fits in with him rather than what the users need. And now we've got greed, which is similar to gluttony, but is a little bit different. And our greedy person here is saying, I want more productivity in less time with the training. In other words, the trainers might think we need to do several half days with groups of people over a couple of weeks period, and our greedy person here says, no, we can't afford that long, just do it, just give them a couple of hours each, they'll be fine. This person doesn't realize that only 20% on average of training is retained 24 hours after training. Now that is a massive average. That is training in a whole range of different subjects, not all technology, and with a range of quality of trainers. But nevertheless, the average 24-hour retention of a training session is 20%. Obviously, if you condense it and rush it, you're going to go below 20% rather than above 20%. You need to allow your users time to absorb, practice, and revise the training so they're committing it to long-term memory. So Mr. Greedy rushes the training. And our final person, our slothful member of the team, he just cannot be bothered. My team are bright. They'll pick it all up. So what the sloth does is omits the training altogether because it really doesn't matter. So they're the key 7 sins. And what I'm going to run through now is how training can be the key to the success of your project. So on the slide there, what we've got is a life cycle of a successful project. And if we're doing proper agile, we'll have much of that for each sprint, or at least each sprint that we release to the users. So at the beginning, we've got envisioning education, and that is where people are allowed to understand the technology so they can then take on board that move to the middle approach and take best advantage of the technology that has been chosen and can work with the project team or with the developers, the technical part of the team, to design a solution. Following that, we should have scoping and then implementation by some technical people. These technical people also deserve training. If you're going to make sure that you get the best results and the best decisions taken when you're making design decisions based on the business requirements. Once we've implemented whatever we're implementing, we need to test, but our testers also require some training so they know what was in the scope and they are able to test thoroughly. But testing should never be, do you like what we're about to deliver or not? Testing should always be, we scoped that in this phase or sprint of the project, we were going to deliver ABC. The testing is to prove that ABC have been delivered as scoped. D, E, and F should never come into it. Now, D, E, and F may well be great features, and they can be recorded as desirable things, and then they may come back later on. But D, E, and F are not part of a project that was scoped to deliver A, B, and C. And so we should be training our users so they understand that, and that they understand how the technology is supposed to work. Then, of course, we will have end user training, and finally, we will have go live. Now, end user training should be quite specifically training a user to do their job using the newly developed application. So it is very different from the technical training that we might build in at the beginning of the implementation to make sure that our technical people are really across the technology. And it's also different from the envisioning education, which is how we know what is in the box before we let the techies loose on it. So I'm now going to look at how training is the key to success in more specifics. So it's reasonably obvious that we want a successful project at the end. And as you've probably realized, key to that successful project is successful training. But what feeds into successful training? Well, first of all, training with excellent trainers. Then training that's aimed to deliver genuine understanding, not tick box and not just focused on exams. Dedicated training, and that means that we're doing training as a discrete piece of work. We also need appropriate training. So we've talked, there's lots and lots of different courses that we could run. what is appropriate for each user in the organization. We also need to make sure that training is at the correct time. So we don't want to be training months before go live or after go live. We also need to make sure that we've allocated enough time. There is nothing clever about rushing a training session so that the users leave with the feeling of, well, he or she knows a lot. I wish I was that good, but I might as well just give up because I'm never going to understand it. I'll just stick with what I know. And of course, training with practicals. Acknowledge that what you're delivering is a practical tool, so training must be practical. Of course, I would love to hear about your training successes. There's my contact details.